components documentation in the React Advanced Guide. So here they basically are saying they recommend using controlled components to implement forms. In a controlled component, form data is handled by a React component. So the alternative they're saying is uncontrolled components, where form data is handled by the DOM itself. So to write an uncontrolled component, instead of writing an event handler for every state update, you can use a ref to get form values from the DOM. So in control components, I think we use the value. In control components, we use value. Here is saying if you want to use uncontrolled components, so they're saying, so here they have a sample of a controlled component. So here they're saying, yeah, so whenever the value changes, we are changing the value, the state, I don't know, what is it? State is an object. Yeah, so we maintain state. We are changing a property inside the state object, a property called value inside the state object. So this is a controlled component. So in an uncontrolled component, they're saying we will be using a ref to get access to the component itself, and then we'll store it, I guess. So let's see. So to write an uncontrolled, again, reading this thing, to write an uncontrolled component, instead of writing an event handler. So here they have an event handler for on change, which is doing nothing but it is setting the state of the value. Okay, so this is, yeah, so this is actually setting the initial state. So this is setting the initial state. After that, we are using a on change event handler to set the state with the set state method. So instead of they're saying, instead of writing an event handler, so here our event handler is this. We wrote a handle change event handler to set the state. They're saying instead of doing that, they're saying you can use a ref to get the form values from the DOM. So let's see. Okay, so here, if you see the difference between there and here, if you see the lines, let me put the lines next to each other. So if you see the highlighted one here, so here we are using ref to get the element itself, and then we are storing the element itself in the component property called input. And then when the user submits the form, so when the user submits the form, we have an event handler called handle submit. So in the handle submit event handler, what we are doing is we are getting the value from the saved property. So here we saved the element itself. We saved the element itself using ref. We saved a reference to the element itself in a property called this.input. So when they submit it, we get access to the value of the input element by doing something like this. It's pretty convoluted, but looks like, yeah, they're saying that it's not recommended, but in some cases, let's see what they say. Since an uncontrolled component keeps the source of truth in the DOM, it is sometimes easier to integrate React and non-React code when using uncontrolled components. It can also be slightly less code if you want to be quick and dirty. Otherwise, you should usually use control components. So basically, I think maybe if we integrate non-React components into our React app, then this might come into play. This uncontrolled, we might have to create some uncontrolled components. Otherwise, not, I guess. If it's still not clear which type of component you should use for a particular situation, you might find, okay, they have an article that might tell us where. Okay, so there is a blog post by someone. It talks about where this might be really useful. Anyway, I don't foresee using uncontrolled components a lot, because if there is a non-React code that I want to integrate, maybe something like Google reCAPTCHA or something like that. Anyway, I do not know where I'll use it, but I will revisit this when I have to use this. So in uncontrolled components, they're saying, so the value attribute on form, and in the React rendering cycle, they're saying value attribute on form elements will override the value in the DOM. That we know. With an uncontrolled component, you often want React to specify the initial value, but leave subsequent updates uncontrolled. So basically, we want to set because it's an uncontrolled form, maybe we can set the default value, like initialize the component with the default value. But after that, because it's an uncontrolled component, you want other things to handle updates. So to handle this case, looks like there is a default value attribute that can be used to set the default value. And after that, because it is an uncontrolled component, something else will take care of updating the component. So likewise, input type equals checkbox and input type equals videos equals radio support default check. So looks like there are a few other input elements. If we want to use that, if you want to set the default value of an uncontrolled component that uses these, we can use the default checked attribute. And for select, looks like select and text area support default value. Okay, so looks like there are a few HTML input elements that support default value or default checked. I don't know if there is somewhere else which has a list of all the things that are supported. But anyway, so this is what uncontrolled component is. Again, just to summarize, uncontrolled components, we can use uncontrolled components when we deal with React and non-React components, React and non-React code. And so in a uncontrolled component, we won't be using an event handler to handle changes to the state. Instead of that, we'll use a ref attribute to save the element or the component in question itself in a property. We save it as a property, and then, so if you see, we saved it in the input property, and then basically you have access to it, and it's outside. Yeah, you have access to it, and then it can be used in any which way you want. And to set default value in an uncontrolled component, we can use either the default value attribute or the default checked attribute. A default checked attribute can be used for input types like checkbox and radio button, and default value can be used for others like select, text area, and input. I'm sure there are other other ways to set default values on other HTML5 standard elements, but they're not listed here. That's it for uncontrolled components. The next one is optimizing performance. We'll start that in a few minutes.